Hello and welcome back to all of our listeners from around the world. I'm your host, Kyle, and today we've got Yosef Joe Harrow on the podcast with us. A really special guest, a man that you'll hear as we go through this of real technology, compliance, and DevOps enthusiasm. And we've dubbed this one where DevOps meets compliance. So a little bit of an intro just from my side and about Yosef. So this man began sort of Linux as a hobby, I would say. Co-founded the New York Ubuntu Loco team quite a few years ago, back in 2007. Worked as a freelance web developer and system admin, and entered into the DevOps space that's really forming the core of the podcast today, around 8 years ago. Since this time, he's worked as a DevOps engineer at some really big, well-known companies, and he'll take us through a little bit more on that shortly. And also has worked in a role of DevSecOps as well as compliance engineer. So I think you can already see how we got the title going for today. And that included working towards the effective and successful implementation for both SOC 2 and PCI-DSS for over 10 different cloud products. And then finally, on a personal note, he's a tech guy. You can hear that already. Enjoys playing around with some microcontrollers like Arduino and Raspberry Pis, is into his gaming and has written different types of 2D web games, as well as enjoys playing some VR games. So before I go any further, Yosef, Joe, you let me know what you prefer myself calling you and what the listeners listening to. Thank you for joining our call and being on the podcast today. Anything else from that intro you'd like to add in?
Uh, no, I think you pretty much covered. Thank you for the introduction. It's good to meet you as well, Kyle. And I think you can just call me Joe. It's fine. So straight off the tongue, so it's no problem.
Magic.
Um,
Love it.
yeah. So yeah, we can get started, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. So, I mean, maybe to kick it off and to set the scene a little bit about the podcast today. So, we're going to take you through obviously DevOps and compliance. We're going to talk about the overlap, the differences, some specific stories and projects of Joe's as well. We're going to throw some information security in there, talk about some challenges in the process. I hope it's sounding quite exciting already. So, I mean, maybe to kick it off, Joe, what is DevOps?
Right. So for a long time, people have struggled to define what DevOps is, and I just trust the definition from Atlassian, which is that it's a set of practices and tools and actually, some philosophy as well. And the general idea is to automate and integrate processes between different dev teams and IT teams. And, it really emphasizes team empowerment, cross-team collaboration, technology automation. In short, it's a combination of the words development and operations, and it reflects the process of integrating those two things together into a continuous process. And that definition itself is to some people still a bit vague. And what I can do is I can share my own personal experience about what I've seen DevOps as, and I've actually typically seen DevOps teams kind of fit into three different roles. One of those is owners of the DevOps transformation. So basically, people are responsible to promote DevOps practices, introduce tools, philosophy related to improving automation, empowering teams and collaboration. Introducing and integrating teams that help with that, like introducing Git and Git workflows and GitLab, all kinds of CI/CD tools, monitoring, container orchestration, Kubernetes Helm. So that's the general idea of behind DevOps transformation. But besides for introducing the ideas and empowering teams ideologically, there's also the practical work of infrastructure management. So oftentimes people will get confused about, is someone a DevOps engineer or are they a cloud infrastructure engineer? In fact, in one company I was in, they did away with the term DevOps altogether and just called us cloud infrastructure engineers because they had already gone through the ideological process that I talked about earlier. So there's infrastructure management, which is just basically designing, building, monitoring, and maintaining infrastructure of the organization, which nowadays is usually cloud infrastructure. and they do so in a way which uses DevOps practices usually, so making it scalable, visible, and automated. Third, very important part of DevOps is developer enablement. So it's really important for throughout the DevOps transformation that there's someone who can help guide the developers through using those new tools that are being introduced, like various new CI/CD and infra tools, and it's also in the joining of development and operations. It's important to have someone with the operation point of view, so they also engage in discussions about software design, and they also will tend to build and deploy tools that allow developers to take full ownership of their applications. And this could be something from as simple as like creating a service to clear cache for a CDN, or to something as complex as introducing, an internal developer platform, an IDP like Backstage, which allows them to, template their applications more easily and perform service discovery, and to learn more about other applications in the organization and not require them to constantly ask people for information. So that's pretty much how I would define it. Yeah.
Short and simplified. And I
Yeah,
mean,
short and simple.
if
Yeah.
if we look at the concept in itself, well, I mean, I think there's a reason that that explanation was as encompassing as it was, because it's quite a big sort of topic that we talk about, right?
Yeah.
And one of the really cool things for me in that was the developer enablement side. And it maybe sounds a little bit silly, but you think about DevOps and you maybe think output from it, not necessarily also helping make that developer's life better, as silly as that sounds as well. And those small wins on a daily basis that will practically make the operations and the output of what they're doing better. So it's driving that. But yeah, how do you sort of, I mean, you touched on a few specific points with it as well, Joe. That developer enablement, I mean, without it, projects are never even going to succeed, right?
Well, they'll succeed eventually, but
Mm,
one of the beautiful things about developer enablement is that uh, you remove the crutch, right? So the classic way of dealing with systems and deployment in the past was throw it over the wall to system. They'll deal with it. But and nowadays you have some companies which also act that way towards DevOps. Throw it over the wall. DevOps will deal with it,
yeah.
right? But that's not the goal. The goal is to empower developers. Now they're probably never gonna be sitting there, even 50% of their time writing infrastructure code, but
Mm,
uh, at least in most organizations. But at least they'll be able to make smart decisions about infrastructure, and if they need something urgently, they can write the Terraform or write the Pulumi and just make a pull request and have DevOps approve it, right, or review it, and so they can basically be empowered, right? That's part of it.
mm. Absolutely, and the compliance and the auditor in me gets going and ties into our next subject really nicely there when you talk about if they need to, they have that ability and they can go and do it. But if we, I mean, pool information security and compliance into the discussion a bit, it maybe sort of paves the way for us to discuss a little bit about the CIA Triad, from just from an operational and information security perspective. So maybe just using that to set the scene. Can you take us through that a little bit?
Right. So um, you know, when people think about DevOps and they think about information security, they don't necessarily tie the two together, right? And
Mm,
and there are concepts in information security that a lot of DevOps people have never heard of, right? And I think CIA or AIC, as it's called by some, is one such term. Like I'm sure there are DevOps engineers who are security oriented and they know what it is and they heard about it, but I think a large number don't. And it's interesting though because despite maybe the lack of understanding from some security about DevOps or some DevOps about security, there are actually uh, uh, many things in common, many points from CIA that DevOps hits. So just to kind of for those who don't know what it is, I'll just give a quick overview of what the CIA Triad is. It's a model that's used in information security, and basically it defines three principles: confidentiality, basically preventing sensitive information from unauthorized access; integrity, maintaining consistency, accuracy, trustworthiness of data; and availability, which is ensuring information is consistently and readily accessible. So making it available all the time. And so what I'll do is I'll try and, for each of those points, give a little bit of maybe insight into how DevOps is actually related to those points. So when it comes to confidentiality, actually DevOps teams often use centralized identity providers like Okta, Azure AD, and one of the reasons they do it is not necessarily because they're thinking, well, I want things to be as secure as possible. Sometimes they are, but not always. Sometimes they're just trying to make their own lives easier, right? Because when you have a single point of access for users, so when someone leaves, you just remove them from one place. When someone joins, you add them from one place, right? So really, there's a lot of work that's done by DevOps with IDPs like Okta and Azure, and another reason why DevOps is interested in properly controlling access is because, well, at the end of the day, in most cases, they're responsible if the systems go down, if they stop working. And security incidents are a really good way to make sure you get a wake up call in the middle of the night. So typically
Not
something
one
like,
you want though, right?
no, no, no. It's not what I look forward to. No. So it is definitely something that is on DevOps mind, and something they think about, right? And one of the reasons why um, they have a focus on security. And it's not all that they do, right? They work with making sure that when they create keys, they're secure. They properly configure network access, making sure that there are no security group holes, so some bad actor comes in. And often, in a well-built DevOps team, they'll also have alerts to tell them about when there's some kind of strange or unauthorized access, and so then they can immediately act and prevent some kind of larger incident. So yeah, that's the confidentiality part. When it comes to integrity, I would say that there's a similar motivation, that we want to avoid getting woken up in the middle of the night. We want to avoid failures. We want to avoid any kind of issues with the platform and the application. And so in order to do that, we have to make sure that we use reliable storage mediums, network devices, that we configure DB servers properly with HA, so that in some cases we can avoid data loss. We in more advanced scenarios, you'll have developers working together with DevOps to implement streaming services like Kafka, so that data can be properly ferried from services to some kind of more permanent store or other application, and or replay data if they need to, right? What else do? We make sure that there's a backup strategy. We make sure that there are backups that happen on a regular basis, because if I can tell you of at least two scenarios off the top of my head where a user just entered a query into the database. I know it's not supposed to happen. They're
Mm,
not supposed to have access directly to production database, but it
absolutely.
happens sometimes, right? And that's it, right? So if you don't have proper backups, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle, as they say. So yeah, that's it's pretty important as well. And a lot of the things that related to integrity are kind of handled by cloud infrastructure tools themselves. So S3 has built-in version control, which is often used by DevOps, and so on. Any questions so
Perfect.
far, by the way?
No, I wanted to just maybe have a very brief chat. I mean, while we're talking about the integrity side,
Yeah.
like you said, pulling maybe the compliance from my side in, that you don't want it to happen, but developers do now and again have access to a
Oh,
production environment. And I mean, if we're looking from a compliance perspective, right, that's obviously a first and foremost typically a red cross in terms of how any company or rather any auditor would see it. You shouldn't have it. It's going to be a controlled deviation or it's a discrepancy. But like you say, the reality of what happens on a day to day, and I mean, there's so many scenarios where this case isn't feasible. In a small organization, you might have a very limited number of developers and they need it. Otherwise, you can't build a product and you can't build a company. And so that's where, exactly like you're saying, having this crossover and having your DevOps, I would go so far as to say, as having that right educational and just good understanding and hygiene of information security to understand the implications, right? Knowing there is a risk associated with it, but what is being done that the sort of it justifies the need for that. And like you say, practically you see it happen. Maybe the question on that to you, Joe, is how do you mitigate as far as possible the risk from a DevOps perspective? From a compliance side, it's easy. You put controls in place, you put your checks, your audit logs, or maybe even more so, instead of the mitigation, the justification of that, which is greater in sort of a DevOps space.
so I'll start out by saying that yeah, officially no one has access to production databases, but
Of course. We are
it's
in front of
all
the auditor now.
it's all done with automation. We run CI, and they make the changes, right? Uh,
Yeah,
I'm not going to name names, but I've seen a lot. I have a lot of war stories related to that, right? So,
absolutely.
um, you asked an important question. What can you do about it? And I think that what I just talked about is one of the solutions. You can have uh, scripts which run your database operations, all kinds of database automation, instead of doing things by hand but manually, and do so properly with version control. So if and with CI. So if something makes a change to the database, you know exactly what happened, when it happened, what caused it, and you can properly do a postmortem and roll back if you need to, and so on. Hopefully,
Yeah.
right? And you can't always roll back. You sometimes need to restore a backup, right? And that brings us to the next point. You can take backups, right? Because mistakes happen. It's part of life, and pretending that they won't happen is the worst possible thing you can do, right? Acknowledge that mistakes will happen. We are people. People make mistakes, and so prepare for it with a proper disaster recovery plan, right? Make sure that you have uh, frequent backups that work. Make sure that you can go back to where you want to be, and not suffer a huge loss, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you as a DevOps person, I appreciate you're talking the compliance language we want to be hearing. And I mean, in terms of a specific number of controls that you've covered, the practical value that you get from them, from having your backups implemented effectively, from doing a DR plan on at least an annual basis, something like that is first and foremost manageable and hugely valuable, right? Like we're saying, I mean, a lot of the cloud tools and cloud operations and all your third-party services that you're using have the capabilities for these. So to actually spend that time, and I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, but in that initial setup phase, to have things working that you don't want to just sort of enable a tool and hit the ground running with it. And then you realize 3, 4 months down the line, actually, you don't have the capabilities for rollback or to restore from a backup version that you really needed because there was sort of a blind trust placed on a service to say, oh, we're going to enable this in cloud provider X and it's going to take care of everything for us.
So I think it's important just to note uh, one main thing, which is in most of the DevOps teams that I've been part of, the terms DRP and BCP are well known.
Sure.
Usually it's a big project, it's a big task that we get, either to make the design and fill out the business continuity plan or the disaster recovery plan, and so it's not a term that's strange to a lot of DevOps. These two concepts, and I think that as I said earlier, because DevOps has a focus in making sure that their infrastructure is working and working well, um, we do have an eye towards compliance and towards security when we do our work, and I think that any good DevOps will always have a security focus. The same way that they'll have a financial focus, they're also thinking about how much things are going to cost. Right? It's part of doing the job well, I think. And so the concerns that you mentioned earlier, I think that they can be mitigated by educating people in the DevOps team if they're not educated already. Maybe having a security champion in the team who can educate those who are not so well aware about compliance and security, and therefore, make it so that security is part of the process and it's not an afterthought.
Absolutely. And I know, I
Security
mean,
and compliance, right? So including backups and all that.
yeah, sure. Yeah, and I know I interjected at a point where we were sort of in the middle of completing that CIA Triad descriptions, but maybe a final point. I mean, we've brought a lot of automation into the discussion now, right? And like you said, if you as those DevOps teams actually have compliance and information security at the forefront as part of your ongoing processes, well, the automation of different tools can really enable that. I mean, just another thought from my side with your production access situation. There's so many tools nowadays that will limit that and give you temporary access, right? So
Right.
you have a process that's going to allow the effective and efficiency of developers doing what they need to do, but mitigating that risk by sort of clamping down on it. Maybe the question practically is, what other automation from a security side, if they pop into the top of your head, do you sort of see DevOps using on a daily basis?
Absolutely. So if we're talking specifically about the manual DB access that's sometimes required, uh, it's easy to say that I would like to live in a perfect world where everything is automated, but the reality is that we don't live in a perfect world, and we probably never will. Uh,
Yeah.
but so there'll always be times in different scenarios where developers may need to run some kind of commands on production, right? Carefully, of course. And there are tools that help them do that. If I were to mention the best pattern that I've seen so far, it would probably be um, temporary database credentials through HashiCorp Vault, right? So a lot of people in the security space are familiar with Vault. It's a tool by HashiCorp, and it allows you to manage access through plugins to databases. It can provide temporary credentials through the click of a button. And it can manage secrets. Like its main function is to manage secrets, but it has other features as well, right? And uh, typically speaking, you get access to, if you want to use what I think is one of the better patterns, you get access to HashiCorp Vault through SSO, and then, through infrastructure as code, you have access to a certain role in the database, and then that allows you to generate a temporary lease for a database, and then you can use that credential that's generated for you. But after a certain period, usually 24 hours or something like that, your credentials will expire. And that way, even if for some reason you copied it somewhere, no one can use that to go into the database. Or if you wrote a script in CI somewhere and then you accidentally clicked run again, it won't work with those credentials, right? So that's a way to add a layer in between the user and the system to try and acknowledge a real need, but also protect yourself.
And Joe, I mean, we're moving quite nicely through in this conversation part of what you're seeing from tools on a day-to-day basis. I maybe want to suggest, and I mean, for all the listeners joining us today, when we were offline, we were sort of discussing a bit around it. And a big part was obviously what Joe in reality has seen, and maybe a section that we had sort of dubbed a story time and those personal stories he spoke about earlier. Joe, maybe if we can spend a few minutes diving into a little bit around those. Tell us what you've actually practically seen and what your experience has been like.
All right, absolutely. I know we kind of just skipped through the whole CIA. And I'll just before I give the story, I'll give one word about the A in CIA, which is availability. It's really simple. We try and make things available. We use auto scaling. We use automatic failover wherever possible, and we use things like S3, which has 11 nines availability, which is really great. So it's really built into what we do, right? So there is like CIA, there is a core model of information security built in to DevOps through our own desire to build good infrastructure that doesn't go down. Um,
Mm.
so moving on to the story that you asked about, um, I will share a story that I had in one of my previous workplaces, specifically related to compliance. We were the DevOps team was kind of chugging along, doing their sprints as usual, and we got an urgent requirement to export evidence for a deadline of like 1 month. Now, if anyone's ever done compliance before, prepared for a certification, they know that 1 month is not enough time. It's just not, right? But that's all we had, right? And sometimes you get last minute requests and things fall through the cracks, and so for about 2 weeks we had three DevOps engineers dedicated to this, sitting there exporting evidence, taking screenshots with the timestamp, because if you take it without timestamp, you got to take the picture again.
Yep.
You just do your work all over. Yeah, not fun. True, we can in some cases export, CSV files or generate JSON and so on, do some kind of smart dumps, but there are a lot of places where all you can do is take a screenshot, and you do have to be careful with that, right? So we had three DevOps doing that for 2 weeks, basically a whole sprint, and they just their sprint was gone, right? And I think it was that point where I just took a step back and I said to myself, "Whoa, that's like it was such an intense experience because we came very close to failing the certification. We didn't, of course, but it felt like at some points like we might fail it. There was that much pressure, and it was on a lot of people, and people obviously were drained, and it wasn't a fun experience. So afterwards, I really did think to myself, there's got to be a better way than this, right? Sitting there and clicking buttons like a monkey, that can't be where we are in 2020, wherever in the 2020s when it was, right?
Yeah.
I immediately thought about compliance automation, and I started doing some research into different compliance automation tools. That's actually how I learned about Scytale, how I met Mehran, I'm really happy that I did meet him because I learned a lot from him.
Awesome. I mean, look, a story like that is great because it's what we see, right? The reality is more than anything else, there's that expectation from customers and people now in 2024 that that's what a compliance project looks like. And the sad reality is that if you aren't going to do it in a smarter way, that's exactly what you're going to experience. Look, the only point is I love the 1 month before, and that's not realistic, right? The number of customers that we're so fortunate to come across that a month seems like quite a long time. Can't we do this in a couple of weeks? I mean, doesn't
Right,
sound that bad,
right.
but we're obviously moving forwards all the time and getting better with this compliance automation. So maybe question to you before we dive into it too much. The biggest sort of save or light bulb moment where you were like, no, this is actually the answer. This is the way forward. What was it?
It was when I had to do it myself. Because at
Yeah.
some point I was delegating tasks and I was like, that looks really tedious. I feel bad for those guys. And
Mm,
then I had to do it myself, and it was far more tedious than I even thought it was. Like it is really, for a technically minded person who strives to build technology, and or at the very least troubleshoot technology, those kinds of menial tasks like clicking buttons to export evidence, those are the kinds of tasks that'll really, take a person's soul away, really.
Yeah, fair enough. And I mean, I don't think there's no replacement for the experience, right? So having been through that, I suppose for companies that haven't gone through the process, well, if it's cheaper to do it manually, let's take that approach first. But once you've actually maybe seen the gain and the value from it, because also doing it manually, there has to come that crossover, right? There's a time where you want to do it as valuable as possible, and then you get to the point, like you said, where it's tedious and it's a headache, and you actually just want it done. And you also then obviously lose that value from the ongoing compliance, the information security, and what you want to build on a daily basis. Um, and I know maybe the next step forward here, you wanted to have a little bit of a discussion today around GitOps. I know we might have another story or two, so if you want to take us through any more, yeah, the compliance headaches are always great to hear because I can obviously sit on this side and talk to all the listeners about, well, good news, there's so many solutions for that now.
Um, I think that as a DevOps engineer, probably the only other real issue that I've seen um, is when it comes to things like, um, I would say, making sure that uh, your infrastructure stays compliant. Because
Mm,
typically the cycle that I've seen is that audit starts, internal auditor or the CISO comes in, puts pressure on DevOps to fix security holes that were discovered, and then everyone rushes to fix and plug the holes or come up with excuses. And there's like 2 or 3 months of that, and then everything goes back to normal, and
mm.
all of a sudden we're making holes again in the ship because we can, because no one's looking, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, definitely, if we're talking about compliance challenges and things related to compliance that can be, improved from the DevOps side, I would say that being able to know whether your system is continuously compliant, being able to, in a dream world, plug those holes automatically, no, that would be the perfect solution to basically this issue that I talked about, right? You asked for another story that base without giving details, that basically is the second story, because I've seen, and it's not just one, I've seen it multiple times where this happens, where audit's over and then everything just kind of falls apart. And not everything,
And
like,
look,
I don't want to exaggerate, but yeah.
Joe, you're talking my language. I'm listening to this thinking, how can we get you to go and speak to every single DevOps team around the world? Because you just get it. It's as simple as that. I mean, the reality is that there's a lot involved with it, but unfortunately, it's very easy. Like you say, okay, quickly do the patch job, make it look fine for the audit. Okay, go back because this was a faster way of doing it. But that trade-off again of we were talking about it, spending that time on implementation or building something that's secure and efficient and effective and being able to use it instead of scrambling every few months in preparation for an audit. Um, can I just get you to speak to every single DevOps engineer I've ever spoken to in the history of time?
I don't think that's technically possible. Like, there's a main limitation, which is the time-space continuum. Uh, uh, but you could share the podcast with them.
I mean, spot on. And mainly this is coming from a converted DevOps secure engineer, right? So I mean, let's keep going today then, and
Yeah.
let's
So
let's
so
dive into the world of GitOps.
so actually, the reason why I mentioned that last story is because I talked about a dream where these security holes get plugged automatically, but the truth is, it's not a dream anymore. There actually is a solution today for it, and it's related to GitOps, right? So when I say the word GitOps, if any DevOps are listening, probably the first thing that comes into their mind is Argo CD, because it is, one of the hottest GitOps products, in the past couple of years, and they're not wrong, right? Argo CD definitely is a tool that helps with GitOps, right? So it's quite an important and critical tool for managing Kubernetes infrastructure in a very good approach, right? But the term GitOps itself might seem familiar to you, and you'll say to yourself, well, this is not a new term, right? I've heard of this before, and probably if you're saying that to yourself, it's because you almost certainly have, right? GitOps as a concept, classic concept of GitOps has been around for a long time. Like according to some sources, since 2017, right? So really a long time. And essentially, if you think about what classic GitOps is, it's basically an operational framework to take DevOps best practices um, from application development and then apply them to infrastructure automation. And it's a nice definition, but you'll immediately ask yourself, what does that look like? So the classic GitOps pattern is made up of mainly four parts. One of them is infrastructure as code. That's a name that I think 90% of the people listening will already have heard for many years. Code versioning through Git, also very popular. Release gating through CI. CI is definitely not a new term. And auto application through CD or continuous deployment. Again, not a new term. Specifically, when we talk about those four steps to classic GitOps, with infrastructure as code, you're declaring your system with code, usually through some kind of uh, intermediary tool that understands that declarative text and turns it into infrastructure. So whether that be Crossplane, Terraform, Pulumi, Kubernetes, Helm, what have you, right? It takes some code and then turns it into infrastructure. And obviously, one of the main benefits to having code is that you can use, coding practices like dry, don't repeat yourself, right? You all kinds of things that you just can't do when you're clicking buttons, right? Code versioning using Git obviously has benefits because you have a single source of truth for your infrastructure, and you have a great source of versioning, right? You don't have to. I remember when I first started developing and hosting websites, I didn't know what Git was. I was like copying files from, and most people already know the benefits of Git versioning, so I don't need to convince anyone. So move on to the next one. Release gating, CI. So the paradigm here is again very simple. We create pull requests, merge requests with the change that we want to make to the infrastructure, which is declared in code, and we can do all kinds of things. We can test it to make sure that there are no security holes in the code that we're about to deploy. We can run some kind of other scans that we think are important for our organization. Like if we want to filter specific secrets, we can understand whether there are secrets in the code at that point. And really, it serves the merge request and the pull request serve as a gate for deployment. And then with CD, we obviously can automatically deploy whatever change it is that's gone through the approval and testing process. And so this is really a common pattern that people have known about and have used for years, right? So why then do we call Argo CD GitOps if it doesn't necessarily fit into that? And what is it about Argo CD that's so attractive? As an example, so I'll answer that by introducing the idea of modern GitOps. And if you ask yourself what modern GitOps is, in my opinion, it's all what we just discussed before, all the whole foundation of classic GitOps, but we add 2 points on top, and those 2 points are, or two principles, are drift detection and self-healing. And what drift detection is, it's the ability to automatically detect when your infrastructure no longer looks like your code. So you've taken all the time, you've written this beautiful code, and then someone goes and private messages a DevOps and says, "Hey man, I need this small fix. Please, can you do it now? It's urgent for the customer. He's going to leave us if you don't do it." And so you go and you
Yeah.
make the little change, and maybe you have a manual changes channel where you can report the change, but oftentimes you don't, and so no one knows it was done. And 10 years later, or sorry, not 10 years, 10 months later, my bad, you come to your next audit and you discover what? The security group has a rule allowing what? And no one saw it for the past 10 months because it just slipped through the cracks. So with drift detection, that doesn't happen. As long as you have infrastructure as code, um, that can be used as a source and an agent that can look at your infrastructure and compare it, so you can detect drift. And it's a very important concept for ensuring the state of your infrastructure is consistent. Now, if you want to take it one step further, you can introduce into your company the concept of, or the principle of self-healing. And with self-healing, you already way in the future, right? You're in 2024 and beyond, right? Because with self-healing, you're not just detecting the drift, you're actually handling it in near real time. And that is incredibly powerful. That is the dream that we talked about not 10 minutes ago, right? The thing that 10 years ago people were thinking to themselves, maybe, I wonder if we'll ever get there. Well, we're here now. you know?
Mm.
And I think that the applications for it are just uh, uh, um, boundless. Like obviously it's something that is good because it keeps you from having changes introduced without you knowing about them. But the benefits of it, I meant to say, the benefits of it are boundless because there are so many things that can go wrong by changes which are undocumented and not known about, and this prevents all of those things. And one of the things it prevents is, as I mentioned before, failing uh, audits or having to race to fill up patch a security hole or experiencing a security breach because there was a little rule that someone put in a security group that no one knew about.
Look, you've sold me and you've convinced me, and I'm pretty sure the same goes for everyone listening. So I have one very simple but very complex question at the same time, Joe.
Okay.
For a company in the Stone Age, which could be 3 months ago or maybe a couple years, where do they begin with moving practically to getting this in place? Um, the reality of what that looks like.
So I think the very first thing they'll want to do, if they're truly in a Stone Age, it means that they might not even have classic GitOps, and I think that it's critical to start with that. Argo CD is a great tool, really, and you can have a lot of your infrastructure still done manually or just not managed in Git, and then only use Argo CD for Kubernetes, but everything else is in the Stone Age. You can do that, but personally, I would want, first of all, to move my infrastructure as to an infrastructure as code approach. Start from the foundation and work my way up. Introduce Git if you don't have it. Introduce a proper flow for your Git with good CI. Maybe you won't get all the tests in the beginning, but at least you'll have like maybe even a basic linting test or something like that. Um, uh, get used to using pull requests, get used to using merge requests, and eventually, when you feel confident enough, you can start even using continuous deployment. Some people may choose to go with continuous delivery first, which is where you prepare the code for deployment, but you have to push a button to actually deploy it. That could be a nice first step before you feel confident enough to go to continuous deployment. Once you have the foundation, I think that it's really easy to go from there uh, to uh, uh, to drift detection and to self healing. But let me backtrack a bit here. I mentioned that this idea that you might want to go in order, but I don't know if that's necessarily true because all of these things are important. And you can, even without properly, uh, you know, migrating everything, start with something very, very small, right? Because I suggested moving everything, but you can do a trial. You can start. You can maybe not go backwards, but look at the next new product that you have. Start with that, and make sure that the infrastructure for that specific service is in code, in Git, with merge requests and so on, and maybe use it as a trial, and then eventually you can go backwards and migrate your other services over time.
And I might be pushing my luck here, but I'm going to ask one last question, Joe. So now you've introduced and explained really clearly the process of what traditional GitOps looks like, what forward-looking what that looks like to someone. You've introduced the concepts, right, of drift and self-healing, and this is where I say it's maybe the greedy question. What's next? What's sort of that next step after that that's going to even revolutionize this further?
So one thing to keep in mind is that the idea of self-healing has been around for a very long time. It's not like I talk about as if it's a new concept. It's not, right? This idea has been around. It's been everyone's pipe dream for a long time. How obviously there's some things that can't be self-healed, but if anyone was forward looking, they would think to themselves, I want everything to be self-healing eventually. And there were, I'm sure, attempts over the past years to implement tools for self-healing. We live in a time where there are popular tools which are built on top of an ecosystem, and other tools like Terraform and Pulumi and so on, and Kubernetes, uh, um, and those tools enable us to have drift detection and self-healing by building on what came before them. And I think that Argo CD itself, while it's been around for a long time, is also kind of new, right? For a lot of people, not in general, but for a lot of people. I would say that despite the fact that Argo CD was first released in 2018, it's only over the past 2 years. You can go to Google Trends and have a look. It's only over the past 2 years that it really became popular. That it saw a huge spike in popularity, and the same is true for drift detection and the word GitOps in general, right? If you look at those, you'll see similar patterns. So uh, I would say that in a sense, this is already cutting edge technology, and I think that this trend will simply grow uh, amongst different technologies. And for example, you can see that there are tools being developed for a similar approach for Terraform and Pulumi. For example, there is a tool called Firefly and Control Monkey and Cloud Concierge, and they revolve around these ideas of drift detection and of self-healing for cloud infrastructure that's deployed through those tools. And I think that we'll just see increased support for these kinds of patterns, and I think that we'll get to a point eventually where the idea of having to scramble at the last minute to plug a security hole or quickly change a configuration because we'll fail the audit if we don't do it, those experiences will become less and less common until infrastructure will become something that just works, and people will get used to the idea that if they do something manually, in most cases they can expect it to just go poof because the agent that ensures the self-healing will just undo their change.
Joe, thank you. I I honestly cannot thank you enough for taking us through all those concepts start to end. For anyone that's listening, maybe the best way to look at this is I hope it's been a journey for you, a journey of learning, of knowledge, and really where we are. I mean, a scary thought is how we always talk about, or you mentioned it a few times here, in the past and ages ago, and we talk 7 years ago. And the reality, 7 years isn't that long ago, right? But tech is just it's evolved so quickly that that's the reality of where we are now. But Joe, thank you. Maybe just in wrapping up and concluding this, if there's any final words you'd like to add, please feel free to. But again, from my side and from our side, it really it's been informative, it's been insightful, and it's been amazing to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you very much, and I will just. It's actually been a pleasure to talk to you as well. You asked some very good questions, which I had fun answering. If I had to leave with just one statement, it would be that the future that I see is for infrastructure, instead of being reactive towards infrastructure and always
Mm,
reacting whenever something happens. Oh, there's an alert, we got to react. We'll start to move towards a world where things are much more proactive, and we can see any issues coming, and issues will just in many cases self-resolve. And personally, I can't wait till we get to a point where, let's say, the you guys will be have less work because the compliance people will have less work because there will be so few issues.
that's the dream, isn't it? You've got me excited, you've got the listeners excited. Joe Harrow, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
No problem.